Welcome back and happy Monday. We are the IDP Heatseekers, and tonight we are going to talk cornerbacks. I know it's hot and heavy content, so make sure you sit back, buckle up, get your big boy pants on, and we'll get to it. We're going to talk about our top 10 cornerbacks for the upcoming season in fantasy football. So these are guys that we think will help you win if you have to start corners. And, hopefully it does help you win. And if it does, drop some comments, ask some questions. We'll get to those later in the show. You'll see we're down a man. Austin had some things pop up, so he's indisposed for the evening, but he is here with us in spirit. We can feel his presence with us as it is. As always, I am joined by my favorite man, Craig Reith. How are you, my friend? How is the world treating you?
Oh, I just got on a minute ago. We went straight from swim lessons that ended at 5:30 our time to go to see our new puppy that we got and all of the things that entailed that, and got home and, of course, situating everything and kids going crazy. I jumped on a minute right before the stream, so I am tired and busy with lots to do, but I'm happy to talk cornerbacks tonight.
With all that excitement, and then you get thrown into cornerbacks. That just gets you even more hot and heavy, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, it is a busy time of year, not only for us. Obviously, we have lives because we have kids and all the things that go with it. You know, my daughter just got invited to join a travel volleyball team, and she got invited to join the older kids. So she's very excited about that because she's still pretty new at volleyball. So they see some talent there. So she's excited about that, but that just means more things to do, to go with dance and gymnastics and all the other things of family life that comes with it. And, and daughter number 2 is wanting to do other things too. So it's, I'm with you. It's, there's always a lot going on. I know you had baseball and now you've got puppy and all sorts, but the NFL also has things too, right? Rookies started reporting as of today, right? So by the end of the weekend, all the rookies for all 32 teams will have been reporting, and the vets will get here soon. And then, training camp is here. So, it's an exciting time, and stick with us because we got a lot of great stuff. If you follow us here on YouTube already, you've been seeing some shorts that we've been dropping. Rick has a new series that he's been working on that we got to be a part of, and it's exciting. It's fun stuff. We'll have some great content in season. So subscribe, hit the notification icon, do all those things. If you want even more great IDP content throughout the season, I would challenge you to go check out what Craig's doing with the guys at Gridiron Ratings as well, because they got some great content they'll be working on, and they do. I don't know exactly what in season looks like with you, Craig, but I'm assuming you're still involved maybe on a Tuesday night thing, which could be, great time if you need questions answered live as well. But that's for them to tell you. I was just promoting some friends because I was on there with them last week and had a great time. So go check them out if you need some in-season stuff. With all that being said, we're going to talk corners tonight. So I will peel back the curtain a little bit. We said our top 10. When we looked at when I put together tonight's show rankings, we had 16 total for the top 10. So we have some differing opinions. So I want to make sure we talk a little bit and try to get different feels for it. I know Austin gave us some notes before he bounced. So there's some great things to add to that conversation there. But first guy up on the list is a guy who led all corners last year. Really shouldn't be a surprise. He should see very similar type of production. Kenny Moore from the Indianapolis Colts. He wasn't my number one guy, but I could make the case that he really should have been all of our number one guys. Craig, talk about Kenny Moore. What do you like about him? What do you think gives him the opportunity to repeat that performance in 2022?
So basically, he's continually gotten better. Over the past, 4 years anyway, after his rookie season, he's a consistent guy in terms of getting you tackles, which just sort of give you a brief rundown on how we approach this. So you've heard us say on this before that a lot of us do sort of cornerback of the week. If you have to pick one in a cornerback required league to play one, there's a lot of guys based on matchups, not even just the team, but the receiver that they're going against and how quarterbacks distribute the ball against certain defenses. You can figure out guys to play. So normally, I think most of us do that. I know I do by and large. But if you're really wanting to go ahead and get one, or some of these guys you can probably pick up on the waiver wire in your league because a lot of them aren't necessarily the big names. Once you get farther down the list a little bit, there are guys that you can get just based on consistency and how they play, generally speaking, and that's going to be based on tackles. The big theme with these guys is who is going to get you tackles week to week, because for cornerbacks, talk about someone later that I'm very familiar with. Those interceptions are great when you can get them, but those aren't a sticky stat year to year. It's really hard to predict who is going to, and I'd say nearly impossible, who's going to have that huge breakout in terms of interceptions, who's going to get you a couple. I don't pay attention to that. Pass deflections and tackles are really the money area when it comes to cornerbacks. And Kenny Moore, again, he's had years of 63, 50, and that was with playing fewer games. He only played 11 that year, 68, and then 82 solo tackles. He's getting double-digit pass deflections in those years that he's been healthy and played, every game but one. Couple tackles for a loss, maybe a sack, couple interceptions. Those are nice, but I'm really focusing on those tackles. Generally speaking, solos if you can, based on your scoring, but the solos and pass deflections, and he's right up there. And like you said, last year, I think in terms of points and maybe even points per game with our scoring, he was a top cornerback.
Well, and he is the perfect example of why you can't necessarily just go based on, things like the PFF grades, because he doesn't grade out well. I mean, when you look at him year over year, he's barely mid 60s to low 70s when you look at the different grades. But what you see is what you get with him. I mean, you can trust that you're going to get a couple sacks every year. You're going to get probably a forced fumble somewhere in the mix. Some of these special things that put him over the top is why he's a guy that you need to target as your top corner or feel comfortable if you've got him as your top corner, rotating him in, because any given week he could pop off with something special that puts him over the top and helps you win that battle against your opponent each year. I mean, I know it's hard to predict with corner. That's why we always say don't go spending a lot on a corner, just rotate in off waiver wire based on, matchups kind of thing. But he's one of those guys you can feel confident about because of the way that the Colts defense uses him and because of what's in front of him. Good defensive line, solid linebackers open up the opportunities for him as well. So Kenny Moore is our top guy, and for good reason. He's continued to develop year over year. And last year we saw, some of his best production. And he's only 26, so he can potentially continue to build on this even a little bit more with what they did. Because they brought over Stephon Gilmore, which I think should help as well, because then teams, they have to be concerned who they're going to target. I mean, Kenny Moore could see an uptick from there. Do you have any concerns with Gilmore coming over, or is Gilmore's age and him being more of a vet do anything to help hurt? What do you think?
I think they're completely different kinds of cornerbacks. There's like a 4 or 5 inch difference in their height. Gilmore's that big physical cornerback that they were sort of lacking as far as a consistent presence last year. So I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. Kenny Young, he was a Pro Bowler. Kenny Young, that's a linebacker that's over on the
not a Pro Bowler
or something now. Not a Pro Bowler last year. Kenny Moore was a Pro Bowler last year. And the other thing about him, just as a side note here, he was an undrafted free agent. So this isn't a thing where draft capital really plays into this when you're looking at guys that have been in the league for a couple of years. You're going to have someone like I think the second guy on our list here who was a first-round draft pick, and we're talking about undrafted free agent right next to each other in basically all of our rankings. So when you're out looking for these guys, pay attention to what they've done in the NFL and what we're sort of projecting them to do this year. And those sticky stats in terms of tackles and pass deflections are really going to be where I feel you make your money if you're picking a guy early.
Yeah, I would agree with you. So moving on to the guy who is our number 2, Jalen Ramsey from the LA Rams. And this is, like you said, polar opposites, undrafted guy. And then even when you look at the different grading sites, PFF, he grades out as the best corner on our list, which is crazy to me. He grades out really well, but came in second in production and fantasy. So, it comes back to the man. How do you correlate? How does this all build the profile of a fantasy football player that you want on your team? Who knows? Because any man's guess here. He's a guy that for a while there I wasn't really targeting. The first few years in fantasy. But he has recently become much more valuable and much more comfortable trusting him starting. But even that, depending on your league type, I know based on Roto Heat scoring, he came in number 2 as well. So Kenny Moore was number 1 in Roto Heat scoring, and Jalen Ramsey was number 2. So how do you feel about Ramsey? Do you feel like what they've done to this team makes a difference one way or the other? They lost Von Miller. They're going to try to trust younger guys like Ernest Jones more. Does that do anything for you with Ramsey?
I think what they sort of figured out to do with Ramsey last year that was effective was sort of use the Ravens, we'll talk about him later, I think Marlon Humphrey, is that he's a guy that you can just use all over the field. You don't need to set him out there on an island against one player or on one side of the field. And last year, if you sort of look at where he lined up, a little over half of his snaps were at wide corner, but then he had about, maybe a quarter at slot corner. He had a good number in the box. They just, were smart enough to use him all over the place. And it was effective for him. And that is something that I think that they're going to continue to do and want to continue to do to have that success that they did last year. And, you sort of look at it, they don't have a ton of great depth in their secondary, not even just at the cornerback position. So being able to have a chess piece sort of like him in that secondary to put wherever and use wherever, it was really effective. And I don't see any reason why they would do something differently.
So I feel comfortable with him getting double-digit pass deflections. He typically will get you somewhere in the 10+ range. Last year wasn't his highest. He's had 18 before. Last year he had 16. How do you feel about, so the interceptions is the one thing when I was prepping for it that stood out to me. So he had 4, which is second most in his career, outside of the 2017, the year I think they went to the AFC Championship, where he had 5. Do you feel comfortable that this guy can continue to get you those? Because otherwise he'd only had 1 each of the last 2 years prior to that. Are you comfortable thinking this guy can get you some of those other things, or do we have to rely on tackles and pass deflections as kind of the big bread and butter that builds his fantasy production?
He's a big physical guy. He likes to tackle. He's just a quality cornerback in those regards. And to your point, pass deflections, almost every year he's had double-digit pass deflections. So between that and the tackles and his style of play and how he was used, I'm not really concerned. I think he'll probably get you, like you said, a couple interceptions. He's a smart player, but his game doesn't necessarily
isn't predicated on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really how he's used as a guy that he's just out there on one man only, paying attention and going up to get you those interceptions. That's just not his style of play. He's looking to make plays all over the field. He's looking to make the tackle. So I think it's just gravy if you're able to get those out of him.
Agreed. Wanted to make sure I brought it up, though. I thought it was an interesting piece to it. So next up would be the guy who came in 4th in our Roto Heat scoring last year, but is number 3 on our list, and that's J.C. Jackson from the New England Patriots. LA Chargers. He moved over in free agency. That was on me. Sorry, guys. LA Chargers corner. So he's on a new team in a new scheme, but last year he had some career highs. I think over 20 pass deflections. He'd had his second year in a row of near double-digit interceptions. I think he had 8 last year and 9 the year before. I don't have the stats in front of me, so I'm pretty sure that was what I saw earlier. So J.C. Jackson goes to a new team that is pretty strong. I mean, they've got a lot of pieces there. They added Khalil Mack via trade. I mean, how do you feel about him in a new scheme, in a new organization with all of that's going on? We've got Bosa, we've got plenty of linebacker help. I mean, where are you at with him? Do you think he gets close to the production he had last year?
So the interesting thing about him is, if you look at those stats that we had previously talked about, aren't really sticky year to year. The interceptions really with him, he has a nose for the ball. And there's something to be said for that, whether it's someone just being out there to make big plays and know where to be at the right time. You see players like that, but also players that study quarterbacks, learn tendencies and what they like to do in certain situations. They can put themselves in a position. And if you have good hands, you might be able to get more interceptions. And that's sort of what Jackson does with the way that he plays. He's had, for first year, 13 games, he had 3 interceptions. Second year, 5 interceptions in 16 games. And then 9 interceptions in 16 games and 8 interceptions in 17 games. So I feel confident saying if he's healthy, he's going to get you a couple interceptions, probably in that 5 or so range. And he also has an even better defense around him this year. The Patriots defense overachieved at times last year, but pretty much across the board, if you look at what the Chargers have, they have a better defense. And then that offense is going to be putting up points. So they're going to have teams throwing the ball against him. It's a loaded division to begin with. So he's going to have all the opportunity out there as their main cornerback. And it's not like he has a bunch of slouch cornerbacks next to him or guys in the secondary. You got Darwin James, who's I think we had as our safety 1 overall going into this year. They have Asante Samuel Jr., a cornerback who had a decent showing his rookie year. They have
Adderley is another guy, yeah.
So that along with, like you said, the pressure that they have, Bosa and it's Mack now, I think, next to him, they're going to be getting pressure. They're going to have teams throwing on him, and he's going to get those opportunities. So sort of going against the grain, I do think he'll have a better shot at most of these players to get close to repeating his interception success just based on what's around him and how he plays.
Yeah, and another thing to add to that, why I would agree with you completely is that, when you look at what he does best, it's in coverage. So, the mental side of it, being able to read and react, things like that, like he does a good job at that, it goes to show in PFF too. His coverage grade is always higher than everything else, significantly. I think he was in the 80s in coverage, and everything else was like 60s and 70s. So he's very good in coverage, which should open him up, especially with his pass happy as that division is, to getting some interceptions. Think about who he's going to be taking on, 6 games a year, facing a very pass happy Chiefs with a lot of new wide receivers to try to build a rapport with, or, Derek Carr with a new, Devontae Adams and some changes going on there in Vegas. And then, you just look at that, and then Denver, obviously with a new quarterback and Russell Wilson, they're going to be passing the ball a bunch in that division, and should open him up to the opportunity to those interceptions potentially. So I'm with you 100% there. Next up on the list, maybe a little bit of surprise people, but I know somebody Austin loves, and that's AJ Tyrell from the Atlanta Falcons. So talk to me about AJ Tyrell. Tell me what you think about him, and put on your Austin hat. Why would Austin love him so much, or what is so much lovable about AJ Tyrell?
I think it's very similar to how we talked about Kenny Moore. I keep thinking in my head Kenny Young, and for the love of God, I can't tell you why, because I don't even think I have him on any of my teams, and I'm looking to.
That's pretty
Kenny
funny.
Moore, and it really isn't necessarily a size comparison thing. There's again a nice size difference between the two of them, but they play similar in that physical style where they're going to go out there and they're going to get you those tackles and they're going to get you pass deflections. His rookie year, he had 74 combined tackles and 7 pass deflections in 14 games. That's a really nice line for a rookie cornerback, and he improved on it last year. And this is going to be another team that is going through growing pains. The teams are going to be throwing on him. He's going to have opportunities, but also, so let's say teams get a big on them and teams start running the ball more. We know generally you see that happen. He's a guy that's physical. He knows how to tackle. He wants to go up there and tackle. So it's not like he's going to be out of the game where someone like, J.C. Jackson, like you mentioned, if they were getting blown out of the water and teams are just running the ball, you're probably not expecting Jackson to be up there getting you tackles still. Whereas you can see Tyrell doing that, and I think that's one of the nice things about him. And if I had to put myself in Austin's shoes and guess, I think that's what he's looking at.
Well, and when you look at kind of the snap breakdown for that player as well, I think he has just as good an opportunity to be up in the box as they put him in coverage. I wouldn't surprise me if you see his tackle numbers this year, probably easily 10 to 15, maybe even 20 tackles more than what he had in his previous season, just because this offense is not going to be great, right? They lost Calvin Ridley for the season, suspended, new quarterback in Marcus Mariota. He probably knows the system pretty well because it was a former coach of his, but still, new quarterback, new weapons, these new top wide receivers, a rookie, and then Brian Edwards, and then Kyle Pitts. So they've got some good pieces, but this team could be a team that's on the field as their defense way more. And that just gives me the feeling that AJ Tyrell really could rack up more tackles. I haven't seen him produce enough of the other stuff to really say, outside of pass deflections. It wouldn't surprise me if he got you 15 to 20 pass deflections, right? Like that is feasible because he got 16 last year. So I'm there comfortable with that. Interceptions wise, I don't know. First year in the league, 1. Last year, 3. Do we continue to see improvement? If they're on the field as much as I anticipate them to be, maybe. But also, does he get worn out and then it's harder because he's just on the field so much? You don't know. So I feel good about him as a top guy. If you're looking for somebody that you can kind of set it and forget it, he's probably pretty safe when it comes to corner. But again, even in leagues where I have to start corner, I rotate based on matchups 9 times out of 10. So if you don't want to be that focused on looking at matchups and digging into where the value plays are there, then he's a guy, probably our top 5 or 6, I'd feel pretty comfortable as kind of set it and forget it plays each week, because you should get some good production out of him.
And again, this is redraft focus here, but if you're talking about for dynasty, he's going to be Tyrell. I mean, going to be 24 this year, so he's a young guy that if you really have faith in, go out and get him if you want. Maybe spend a little bit on draft capital, get him on your team, and hope that he's a guy that you can just plug and play, and then not worry about that position anymore. Besides potentially a backup, depending on how big your roster is.
Well, and I guess that's a good question. So something that we haven't really talked about is what do we pay for a corner in Dynasty if we're really, obviously this is a redraft focus show, but what would you be comfortable paying for any of these kind of top corners in a Dynasty format? So, Ramsey, any of the top, probably 4 to 6 guys that would be solid Dynasty plays.
It's a great question because I don't really draft cornerbacks a whole lot. The only one that I've kept year to year in a league is Marlon Humphrey. And that's because I got him as a free agent off of waivers one year, playing the waiver game, and he ended up panning out to be worth keeping. So it's hard to say. I mean, I would look at him towards the back end, and this is probably later than he would go in a league if you're required to have a cornerback, but sort of how I view defensive tackles. So fill out your offensive starters and your defensive start, your other, big play positions like your edge rushers or defensive ends, that sort of stuff, safety. I'd probably want to fill out your offense a little bit of depth on that end too, as we know most leagues don't have completely balanced offensive to defensive scoring. So again, maybe it's not the way we would play in a perfect world, but I do realize that, offense usually holds more weight, and you probably want to have a little bit more depth there before you go spending on a cornerback, especially if it's a guy that you're not entirely confident in. If you're confident in him, he's probably one of the last starters that you're looking to fill. Again, depending on your scoring, it's really hard to just go off of that, but sort of in the leagues that I'm in, that's the way I'd view it.
Well, and for me, I've never traded for a corner. Like, I was looking through some of my previous trades and leagues that were half-star corner. I can't find a trade where I ever traded for a corner. I mean, it's just because of how, because when you look at based on Roto Heat scoring, the highest rated guy, Kenny Moore, only got you 149 points last year. I mean, that's just not, I'm just not comfortable giving up a ton of draft capital or anything, quite honestly, to go target something like that where, the other top, and some of the guys that we'll talk about aren't even in the top listing, but 149, 137, 134, 128, 116, 116. I mean, the top, the top 6, 7 guys, are, 20, 30 points separated. I mean, I just don't see the return on investment there. So I thought it was a good question, but I was like, I don't really have a good answer because I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be targeting them. One guy that wasn't in the top scoring for Roto Heat IDP scoring is our next guy up, Marlon Humphrey from Baltimore. This is a guy that had a really strong 2020. He had 74 total tackles, 12 pass deflections, interception, couple sacks, or 2.5 sacks, some ton of forced fumbles, 8 forced fumbles. But then last year, significant drop, 44 tackles, an interception, a forced fumble, 13 pass deflections, but nothing else, no sacks, nothing else special that really, I struggle with this one because he's a guy that has been kind of streaky. It looked like he was kind of going up 2019, 2020. You kept seeing the gradual, and then 2021 drop. What makes you think that he's going to have a bounce back 2022 with what this team has done in the offseason?
I'm sorry, I missed the name. My internet cut out.
Marlon Humphrey. Sorry, Marlon Humphrey.
Let me bring up my notes on him because
y'all both had him at 3. I didn't have him ranked in my top 10, but you guys both had him at 3.
Yeah, so last year, of course, he got hurt, so the season was abbreviated, and that's going to be part of it for that. The 2 main years, 2019, 2020, just the tackle floor that he had when you're talking about 53, 70 solo tackles and adding the assist and a couple other the big plays. He's just a safe play, and with how the Ravens have committed to using him, we'll see if it continues. That's one of the interesting things here, and maybe I didn't take into account enough with, having Kyle Hamilton there, and, how are they going to utilize that whole secondary going forward? But assuming that it's going to be similar how they're using Humphrey to how they did previously when he's healthy, he's going to get you enough tackles and then a couple other sporadic big plays, getting you double-digit pass deflections that I'm comfortable taking him there in a division where a physical corner that's going to come up and make those tackles is even more valuable with how much they run the ball.
He's an interesting player to me. So I struggled with ranking him pre-show just because, he did miss like 4 games last year, 4 and part of another against the Steelers when he got hurt.
It was like 5 games if they played 17.
Yeah. So, but then he was so up and down. He had a couple of games. He had, I think, 4 really strong games, Raiders, Bengals, Dolphins, Browns. And those were all really good fantasy productive games. And then there was others. If you got a few points out of him, you were happy. And the way that the team used him, especially last year, was quite a bit different. They had him in the slot almost, half as many times. They had him, deep out wide corner, and it was really strange to me what they were trying to do with him, because I felt like they were, mitigating his value, putting him in the slot. It seemed like he was losing opportunity for fantasy production in the slot. So, hopefully they just keep him out wide and let him take on teams number 1, number 2, however, moving him around. It just seemed like it hurt some of his fantasy value. So I struggled ranking him there. That was kind of what caused me to go, well, I can make a case for some of these other guys. But then when I looked at the other guys I made a case for, I was like, I guess you can make a case for either. So after these first 4, this is where I start, kind of going, all right. It's just your kind of flavor, just like the next guy up. Trayvon Diggs was huge last year, but it was all, like you said, huge interceptions and things like that, where you can't trust that every year. So this guy's near and dear to your heart since he's on your team. What makes you think that he's going to still produce even remotely top 10 corner?
I don't. And I don't think I had him in my top 10. I don't have this memorized.
No, you didn't. I had him at 4 and Austin had him at 6, and you didn't have him ranked.
If you take away, and I'm not saying even all of them, but, half of his big plays, because I think he's going to have a hard time repeating that. He's basically been the same both years in terms of tackles. He had 49 solo, 9 assists in 2020. No, that wasn't fewer games. But even last year, he played 16 games, 43 solos, 9 assists. What I'm looking for in a corner, that's not something that I'm interested in. If you're mainly in a big play sort of league and you want to roll the dice on him, I understand that off of what he did last year. He had 11 interceptions and 2 touchdowns. And that was it. He didn't have forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, sacks, tackle for a loss, anything. Just how they used him. He's a guy that you better be happy that they don't have big plays given up as negative points for a cornerback if you're going to roster him, because what people don't realize, they saw just the big stuff with him. He very much was giving up big plays consistently too. And I don't think that he's going to be able to continue to play that way with the way, like, oh, yeah, you had an interception. That's great. And then you give up a touchdown 2 series later, on a long ball because you're biting on it. Some of that's going to have to come out of him if he's going to stay on the field, and he just does not get enough tackles for me. The pass deflections are great because he's aggressive. But, man, just living on pass deflections is not enough for me when I'm looking for a corner and when I'm going to draft one.
Well, the thing that I feel comfortable about is the division he's in, so he's facing just some not great quarterback play 6 times a year. Some people really like Jalen Hurts, some people don't, but the other 2 are not great. Carson Wentz is a turnover machine. Daniel Jones is still struggling to develop, and now he's got a new coaching staff. So, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for a guy like Diggs. I feel like he still has the potential this year to produce at a high level based on their schedule, based on what they've got. I'm not expecting the interceptions. I'm hoping that he can make up for it in pass deflections and tackles and things like that. But I'm not 100% confident, but I feel pretty good based on the other corners that are, kind of in our top 16 to talk about, that he should still be able to produce, in the top 10 somewhere. I maybe was a little higher on him than Austin, but I get the point that we can't expect the interceptions, but we can hopefully expect continued production and continued growth. We'll see. I mean, I think the defense as a whole is better, though. Some of the younger pieces they brought in, some of the way their defensive line is developing. Guys in the middle, Osa, and some of the guys, I think will help as well. We'll just have to see.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and next up on the list, we're skipping over okay. So next up on the list really should be Bryce Hall from the Jets. And I'm the only one that actually ranked him. So the way our averages ranked out, he actually averaged higher than some of the guys that we have below him. But because I was the only one that ranked him, we're skipping over him. Honorable mention, Bryce Hall from the Jets. I think he has a chance to really boom. But we're going to go to Xavier Howard from the Dolphins. Yeah, he would be the next guy up that at least two of us ranked. And Austin has him at 7. You have him at 9. What do you like about Howard?
Yeah, and giving me another guy here. Let me pull up my info.
One of your guys, and he grades out pretty well. I mean, he doesn't really struggle in anything other than when they have him pass rush. He's not a great pass rusher, but he's a corner.
Let me see. Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to figure out where this all ended up last year.
Well, I can give some stats. So last year, 40 tackles, 2 fumble recoveries, 2 forced fumbles, 5 interceptions, a sack, 14 pass deflections. So pretty solid stat line. Guy's 29 though, in a new defensive scheme with a new coaching staff.
It just felt low, I guess, in terms of and maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I need to go back and revisit him, which we should always be doing. Just seemed a little bit low in terms of tackles for me with what I'm liking and what I'm going for. I mean, 39 and 11, it's not it's basically about what Trayvon Diggs last year, just with fewer big plays. And if I'm going to hold against one of them, I got to hold it against the other one, especially the guy that had fewer big plays. So to me, if I'm looking for consistency in terms of tackles combined with the pass deflections, which some leagues score them, some leagues don't, but you're getting tackles basically in every IDP league. Most of them split out solos and assists. He just doesn't have enough for me to put him up there. But, in terms of like Trayvon Diggs, that's probably more what you can expect out of him year to year is, like 16 pass deflections, 5 interceptions. I don't think you're going to have that high 20s and, double digit interceptions. It's so rare to see guys repeat that in the NFL.
Yeah, I struggled with, and probably why I had Howard at 9, because 2020 was an anomaly, right? 10 interceptions, 20 pass deflections. I mean, those were career high numbers for him. 40 tackles, which is just below his career high of 42 in 2017. I mean, and then we saw a significant drop. Interceptions cut in half, pass deflections 6 less. I mean, same amount of tackles, or right around the same amount of tackles. And then he added fumble recoveries and forced fumbles, but those are things we just didn't see throughout the rest of his career. So it's one of those things where was 2021 kind of an anomaly? Well, 2020 he had great numbers in different categories. 2021 he did in other categories, so it's hard to really tell what to trust with him. Then you add in the fact that he's got a new staff and he's learning a new scheme. I mean, I have him at 9 because he's probably one of the top 10 to 15 corners in the league, and you feel safe about. But you can make a case. I mean, I obviously put Bryce Hall up there, so I am all over the place when it comes to corner. I can build a case for a lot of different guys being productive in 2022. And Howard, I would expect to be, because I expect the defense to be on the field a fair amount, just because I'm not the biggest Tua fan. So I still expect it to be another year or so before Tua is really at the next level, and if he stays on the field. So this team could be on the field a lot as a defense.
Well, and one of the things about Howard, they really don't need him to be sort of that guy that can play all over the field and do everything too, because Byron Jones has at least a history of doing that. Yeah, I was on a different team, but he played that sort of role in Dallas when needed to, and he was really productive doing that. And you've sort of seen the same things out of Javon Holland too. If you look at how they used him last year, he was used once they brought him along all over the field, and he had a really nice year for a rookie, and we were both really high on him going into last year. So Howard isn't the guy that they're able. I'm not saying able. That they have to go out there and utilize in all these sort of different ways. They're able to just, put him out on a side or put him on a guy and utilize him that way as a great cornerback, which he is for the NFL. And some of these guys you're going to see, and you're going to know of great cornerbacks that you don't see on this list, Cornerback's one of those positions where in defensive tackle it can be too, depending on how the scheme they play and plays out. Great players don't always equate to great stats. So it's a little bit different on the defensive side than the offense.
Absolutely. All right. So, Albert, yes, they are. And I'm going to post a link in the chat here in just a second for you. All of our rankings are over on rotoheat.com. So if you want to see what we've got, it is there for you. And we update them. We start updating them once a month in the off season, and then we up it and try to do it twice a month as we get closer to the season. So next up on the list is Patrick Sertan, the second from the Denver Broncos. Obviously, he was a rookie last year. 45 tackles, a tackle for loss, had 4 interceptions, 14 pass deflections. You guys each have him ranked 8th in your list. I don't have him ranked on mine at all, though I was a big fan of him coming out of Alabama. He was actually a guy I really would have loved Detroit to try to get at some point. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen at 7, but would love to get your thoughts on what made you put him in your top 10 going into year 2.
One thing while I'm pulling him up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
About the rankings, we do not have redraft rankings currently on Roto Heat for IDP. We do have Dynasty combined offense and defense. We do have rookie combined offense and defense. Sort of a 3-man IDP operation. So we're slowly building out what we're doing, and that is something that's on our list to maybe not later this year, but certainly next year take a look at and dive into if we're able to. So if you're looking for redraft IDP, don't have those at the moment, you can certainly shoot us questions because we do rank these out with each other to talk about on shows. And we're always happy to answer questions with the redraft rankings if that's what you're specifically looking for. You're not going to find those on the site.
And if you want to have the conversation with us, live, we've got Discord. When you go to roadheat.com, it's going to pop up on the screen right in front of you. Join the Discord. You can talk to our, we have an IDP channel where you can jump in and tag us, and we can kind of have the conversation. So if you are doing IDP redraft leagues this year and you're up and you want to start having those conversations about when to take corner or when to start taking linebackers or when do you take the top players in IDP, we're here to help with that. We have plenty of people in our chats that I'm on the clock. This is my options. What do you guys think? And then, we kind of help the players figure out or help the owners figure out what player may be best for them to target based on the team, things like that. So,
in regards
what about Sertan?
To Patrick, so he was a guy that we liked in terms of cornerbacks last year because he comes from NFL bloodlines. His father played the position in the NFL. He knows sort of what's expected out of him, and he had a nice year last year. If you look at it for a rookie, he was a decent in terms of playing time. He got a good amount for a rookie, and he played quite a bit too. And he had a decent stat line is really what I'm looking at. And for him, it's sort of more of a growth expectation. 45 solo, 13 assists. That's more than the guys that we just talked about in terms of Diggs and Xavier Howard. He had some big plays, 14 pass deflections. That's a nice number there too. Got you a couple interceptions. And I'm expecting growth for him this year, and especially growth on that team. We talk about the dichotomy of the offense to the defense. That offense, by pretty much everyone's account, should be better this year, should be able to be in more of those shootouts, which is going to lead to more of those opportunities for those big play type of things for him. But the consistency and going up and willing to be a tackler and a quality tackler mixed with my expectation of growth is why I had him there.
Well, yeah, as a rookie, he had 900 snaps when I was looking him up on PFF prepping for the show. I mean, the dude was on the field a ton, and you could see, he was kind of all over the place as a rookie. It seemed like later in the season he really started to hit his stride. From week 8 on, strong tackler, didn't miss a lot of tackles, graded out well in that area, and really started to, it seemed like settle down and fill in and fit into the defense and feel comfortable in his own skin, really, as in the NFL. So I'm excited for him. I think he's definitely got opportunity. It'll be interesting to see with the addition of Wilson and what this offense looks like, how often the defense is on the field, because Wilson's very intelligent, and if they do the ball control type offense where they, are focusing on the run a little bit more and doing some of those things and trying to chew up clock, that could hurt, some of these defenders' fantasy production potential. But I'm okay with it. I mean, I definitely think he's a young up and coming player that needs to be on folks' radar. Next up, I want to talk about L'Jarius Sneed from Kansas City. So this is a guy that Well, let's see. When you look at Roto Heat scoring, he came in as corner 5 last year. So he was just behind Kenny Moore, Jalen Ramsey, Trayvon Diggs, J.C. Jackson, and then it was L'Jarius Sneed. Teams obviously changed. There's quite a bit different there now, with all those changes at wide receiver on the offense, but produced well, in his second season in the league. 57 tackles. He had 7 tackles for loss, fumble recovery, forced fumble, 2 interceptions, sack, 8 pass deflections. Big kid, 6'1", 193, good size for the corner position. So what makes you think Sneed has a chance to continue to be a top IDP asset at the cornerback position?
He showed up well in limited action. They were really excited about him his rookie year. Played a bit, got hurt, and then came back, and especially for that playoff run in 2020, he played really well for him. And then last year, going into it as a starter and basically being a starter for the whole year, I mean, it sounds like a broken drum, but he has opportunity. He's out there on the field. Maybe not as explosive of an offense as we'll have to see. But, a lot of people are predicting a bit of a tick down. And when you lose Tyreek Hill, I think that makes sense. But again, that division has gotten more firepower pretty much across the board, which is great for the defense. He's shown himself to be a willing and a quality tackler. I mean, he isn't huge up there in terms of those big plays, but 7 tackles for a loss isn't anything to, shake your head at. 8 pass deflections, a little bit lower than we've talked about, but really it's the tackles, the opportunity, and then what he's going to be going up against, plus what he's shown prior.
Yeah, when you look at how Kansas City used him, they used him in the slot significantly more than any other position. He played out wide, covering a team's 1 or 2, 259 snaps, played in the slot for 684 snaps, and then he was up inside the box playing the run for 101 snaps. So this team really does love him as a slot corner. And I think when I was looking into that, it makes me wonder. So most of the guys that have been on our list are typically more outside corners. Do you think that it's safer to look that direction, or do you think there's some value in the slot corner because of how much teams are in that formation? Should people be looking more towards the slot corners if they're looking for guys to flex in, just because of how many 3-man, 3 wide receiver formations are on the field on the regular?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of an undermined area when people are paying attention to cornerbacks and sort of throwing them by the wayside. There's another guy that we had a question about that we'll get to. He basically is only a slot corner by and large, but he's been highly productive the past couple of years because of how he's used in the system. And that's sort of what you got to look at. One of the things I was looking at for last year, and it didn't pan out the way I wanted, which is fantasy football. None of this is a given. That Steelers cornerback, slot corner, was ridiculously productive when they had Mike Hilton there. And, of course, he had moved on last year to the Bengals, and I think he's still there. But trying to figure out who's going to be the slot corner for the Steelers, just because of the way that's utilized, that's a highly productive place. And if they find someone that they like and they stick them there, you're going to get sort of Gary, the IDP tipster, you mentioned at the start of the show, production by default. Sometimes you just get that based on how they're used in the scheme. And that's sort of what the Steelers had. You didn't really figure out, one cornerback that they stuck with last year. They had a whole bunch of guys that they were trying out through it, so it didn't pan out. But that's the same sort of thing. If you find a guy that is used in the slot a lot and he's going against high-powered offenses and he has one behind him, so teams are forced into those 3 wide receiver sets even more than they're inclined to, which is a lot in today's NFL, I think there is a lot of value to be found at that slot corner.
I dig it. Not Trayvon Diggs it, but I dig it. All right, so I want to rapid fire the last few guys just to name off all the 16 that were on our list for y'all. But what you just said about the player that we're about to talk about, I think leads well into, bringing up some questions Austin had about the specific player in question. So all their guys that were honorable mentions, Jair Alexander from the Green Bay Packers, interesting situation. Kendall Fuller, he's with Washington, I believe. Amani Oro, what do you agree? Is that what you said? Oh, okay. Amani Aruwariye. Sorry, I said that a little fast for the Detroit Lions. Paulson Adebo, who also is Washington, I believe.
No, he's Saint.
Oh, yeah, he's with New Orleans. My bad. Sorry, Paulson Adebo. And then Rasul Douglas, who I'm not going to guess where he's at right now because off the top of my head I forget.
Green Bay. Okay, so 2 Green Bay Packers on this list. So that is the 16 players that we had that we were trying to figure out
how they all fit in the top 10 because we all had differing views on our top 10 of these players. So Tyron Johnson is a guy that also was on this list to talk about. This is the player that Austin had a couple questions about that he wanted to bring up on the show. So I want to kind of lead us into that conversation. So Tyron Johnson from the Buffalo Bills is, like you said, exclusively a slot corner. I think he had over 800 snaps in the slot and very little anywhere else. So Austin's question about him was really curious to ask about Tyron Johnson. You know, our lads has Kaiir Elam listed as a starter opposite Tre'Davious, which would then leave Tyron in his natural position as a slot corner. Does this change your opinion of him, or do you think he's going to see the field plenty enough to have a shot of being a top 10? So with, you know, him staying in the same position, what does that mean for him?
I think that's what I want for him. You know, if you look at the past 2 years with how they deployed him, it's basically been the same as what you said. You know, like 85% of his snaps have been at slot corner, and he's getting you those tackles that we talked about. He had 70 and 24 for solos and assists in 2020. He had 53 and 23 the next year, which, you know, it's a 20 drop, but that's still 76 tackles overall. He had 3 sacks, 4 tackles for a loss, then 1 sack and 5. So he does, from that slot position, be able to get you some of those plays, 7 pass deflections each year. He's a guy that I think is reliable and consistent, which, again, some people want to shoot for the moon, especially if you're in a big play only league. I understand that. Most leagues aren't only predicated on that. And since those stats are harder to predict year to year, a guy that I know is going to get me those tackles and some of those other big plays thrown in, which he's shown the past 2 years based on how he's used in that high-powered Bills defense. Because, you know, look what's around him. You can't just go pick on Tre'Davious White or, you know, the linebackers. They got a solid group. They got great pass rushers. Just Von Miller thrown into that young group that they had from last year. And then that offense, which Josh Allen's there, and it's going to be a high-powered offense. There's going to be opportunity in that slot. And I think from what he's shown, he's a top 10 cornerback for me pretty easily.
Yeah. And I don't want people to look at his production previously and go, oh, man, if he can get near 2020 production, 2020 appears to be an anomaly.
Yep.
If you expect something close to that, then you're going to be disappointed, I would think, just because of how strong this defense is. 2020, the defense was still developing. They were still kind of gelling together. And it's just, I don't think he gets there. I think he can get you, you know, in the 55 to 65 range. That feels pretty comfortable for me just because I think his first 2 years, 2018, 2019, he was still learning and growing, and they didn't use him nearly as much as they did starting in 2020. I mean, he saw a significant bump in action. So I feel good about somewhere in the 55 to 65 total tackle range. And then, you know, I wouldn't expect more than 5 to 7 pass deflections. I would not expect the sacks that he got. You know, if he gets you 1 or 2, great. You know, forced fumbles, you can feel good about 1 probably, and that's about it. So that's kind of where I'm at with him. And I thought that was an interesting question because he is one of those that is breaks the mold in terms of our list of top 10 corners because we don't have a lot of slot corners listed. We have guys that they moved in the slot a little here and there, but, you know, him and Snead are almost exclusively slot corners on our list. And otherwise, I don't know that within the top 10 for sure. I think the rest of those are all pretty much outside guys. So
and one of the things to think about, you know, if talking about where they ended, Johnson ended 15 last year, and you're like, well, why is he in your top 10? You can't always just go by where someone ends up this season year to year. If you go back and you look at, you know, over the past 5 years, the top 10 cornerbacks, you're going to see a lot of guys that have a great year and then they're nowhere near that top 10 again because that's just the way the position plays some years, well, every year, but, you know, depending on who it is, it's a year-to-year thing a lot. If you can find a guy who's regularly in that top 15, top 20, but has that top 10 overall upside, that's enough value, and especially to demonstrate it more than 1 year in that same sort of system, how they're used, there's a bit of predictability with it, which if you're drafting a cornerback, you got to go with what you know you can get. You don't just want to swing for the fences and get a 0, because then you're trying to make that up somewhere else. If you have a cornerback that's losing you weeks because they're not getting you anything, it's really hard to make that up elsewhere.
Absolutely. And just so that people know and understand the context of all this, the top 10 guys based on Roto Heat scoring last year, I read some of them, but I just want to give you the top 10 so you can see kind of where we're at with them, because a lot of the guys are guys that we have in our top 10. You know, Kenny Moore, Jalen Ramsey, Trayvon Diggs, J.C. Jackson, L'Jarius Sneed, Xavier Howard. Those guys are all on our list. Then you have Darius Slay, Desmond King, Roswell Douglas, A.J. Tyrell. So A.J. Tyrell is, but Roswell Douglas was an honorable mention, and then Slay and King are not on the list at all. But then after that, you got Anthony Brown, Byron Murphy, Bryce Hall, and Amani Aruwari. So a couple other honorable mentions. So it's not like we're just pulling names out of hats here. There was some very significant amount of attention paid to what happened last year, as well as what we still think these guys can do this season, because a lot of those guys were on our list, one of our lists in our top 10. So any other comments about corners? I don't know that I have a lot of other things to say, because I typically just look for waiver wire, play the matchups, but I also I go through PFF. I see where guys are playing, how often, snap counts, things like that. And then I try to rotate corners in there. Is there any other tips that you want to offer to the people about corners in fantasy football?
Yeah, one of the things that you can look at in terms of what Brad's talking about is, find the tendencies of the quarterback that they're playing week to week. How much do they like to throw to the slot? If they have a strong slot corner and they have a strong slot receiver, you're going to more likely to find a slot receiver that week that you're able to play, as opposed to just a guy outside. It's really hard for me to pick a guy that just is sticky on one guy or one side of the field. That is a high-end NFL cornerback in terms of real life rating and play, because it's harder to get stuff out of them. That's why someone like, we mentioned Jair Alexander. So he was injured last year. Of course, you can't really look at that by all expectations, because he was injured earlier in the year. He should be back and doing all right. And he's a guy that does all right in terms of tackles, gets you nice pass deflections, but he doesn't get the ball thrown his way as much, just because of how good of a real-life cornerback he is. And it is sort of weird to think about, like, well, he's a really good player, they should get more points. People have tried. It is hard to dig deep enough, even if something like MFL is the site that you play on, to create a stat that rewards those cornerbacks that aren't targeted. So if you can figure one out, you could probably make a good chunk of change getting that over to one of the sites to reward the real life corners that are good more so. But to date, it just doesn't really exist as much.
Well, and I mean, if you start doing that, then you got to try to come up with offensive line scoring, right? I mean, if you can come up with those crazy stats and ways to give fantasy points to other things, then you can do it for some of these other positions that don't get attention and really drive people nuts in fantasy.
Well, and if you want to try that, so I'm going to be in a league. It hasn't drafted, but it's new. I think it's at the PFF All 22, or I don't know if you've heard of it, Brad, but that I'll have to see if I can find it now that I'm talking about something on the air I wasn't prepared for. But it's a new type of league. Of course, I can't find it.
Yeah, it's it looks like all22.com.
Yeah, so you're drafting an entire team. So you're going to have 11 on offense, 11 on defense starting, and you're going to be going off of how well people perform week to week based off of like their PFF grade. So you're drafting offensive linemen, cornerbacks, and that sort of stuff. And I'm in one of them. Not to plug another show, but if you know of the Devi Royale, there are a bunch of guys that are really good and into that sort of stuff, and they love this sort of deep dive stuff. They started up a league that I got invited to on this new All 22 thing. And again, we haven't drafted. I haven't done any prep for it, but that's about as deep as you can get. It's a very different way of looking at it. It isn't just completely stat based. It's like rating based and stuff. Yeah, there you go, Mr. Scampers. You know what I was talking about.
Yep.
So I can't tell you anything about it except it's crazy deep, and it's going to be looking at more of a way to reward those quality players as opposed to players that maybe get you that production because they're not as good on the field. So interesting concept that I'm excited to try. But yeah,
I love the idea. I mean, that sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes, and maybe I can report back in an article or something during the year after the season, tell you how it goes, or we can get one going next year for everyone that watches this show. But super exciting and different, and I was excited to jump in and try it.
Yeah, I do like different. I mean, but unfortunately, the most different I have is the pinnacle of Devy League where we've been drafting, middle school and high school players for 5 years, and that's about it. So, but that looks like a fun style league because, that's the thing that I really like about fantasy is it gets cutting edge in a lot of ways. That's why I like, things like the fishbowl leagues where you have different types of scoring and you're trying different things. And, and that's why I always enjoyed having, kickers and things like that when back in the day. I mean, I don't really do leagues with kickers anymore, but I like the different ways to try to make fantasy more unique and more of a challenge. I mean, that's always more intriguing to me, finding ways to make, challenge yourself, doing the same type of league every single year where you just don't do a lot of things different. Just gets kind of boring in my mind. I like to flip things up, but
to that point, there's another league we're in, that positionless league. There's different ways you can structure your leagues and stuff. This league is, I think it's like 9 or 10 defensive starters, but you're not required to start any position. It's all flex spots on defense, and the offense is mainly flex spots too. But in that league, the way that scoring is set up, we tried to balance it out more for position. Kenny Moore was the number 17 overall IDP in that league, which is very different. But if you want to make cornerbacks viable, there's ways to go about doing it. It's hard time finding a league where cornerbacks are the best players, but 17 is as high as I've ever seen. And, there's a number of other cornerbacks we talked about farther down, in the 20s and 30s. So there's ways to go about it if you're committed to finding it. And then finding people that want to do it and play it with you is another
that's altogether. That's a whole other conversation. So there you have it. So there's our top 16 corners between the three of us. We missed Austin tonight, but he was part of that ranking as well. So that was Austin, Craig, and I put our heads together and shook our magic 8 balls, and there you go. You got your top 16. We give you some honorable mentions on top of our top 10. But as always, if you have questions, jump in Discord, jump in our Facebook community. We got thousands upon thousands of people in all our different communities that are always chatting. Tag us, DM us on Twitter. You can find us wherever. We're all pretty chatty and willing to answer your questions and do whatever we can to help, because we're all in this together. Fantasy football is fun, and it's even more fun when you have other people to talk to about it. So we try to make it fun and enjoyable. Hopefully we have helped you tonight, understanding the cornerback, understanding what to look for, understanding what maybe makes fantasy relevant corners. But if you need us, rotoheat.com, you can find our rankings, all of our lists. Thank you guys as always. We will see you again next week, and get ready because football is here. Training camp is upon us. Enjoy. The off season is over, and let's get back to football, and love you guys. We'll see you later.